Marvelous hello, friends and loved ones! Those of you that have been following this channel for a while know that there are two things that I love: Megami Tensei games and indie titles. You can basically always expect to see both of those when my top games of the year videos roll around, and they're usually what gets me the most excited when showcase season or Nintendo Directs are on the horizon. So then I started thinking to myself, what are some indie titles inspired by Megami Tensei? Everyone would want to hear about that, right? Well, I certainly hope so, because if you're watching this, it means I already made the video, and I've got 5 indie games inspired by Megami Tensei that I want to talk about. But before I begin, I feel I should clarify a few things. When I say games inspired by Megami Tensei, I don't just mean games that have similar gameplay mechanics or art styles. I don't mean games like Mind Zero or Blue Reflection, where game journalists and smug annoying YouTubers are the ones going, "This gives me Persona vibes." And I don't mean any Megami Tensei fan games that actually use figures or terminology that we're already familiar with as fans of the franchise. I mean original games where the developers or publishers or someone officially involved has said that something Megami Tensei related directly inspired the final product. I'm also not going to be including games that are in early access or just have demos right now, though I am very open to revisiting this idea in the future if it's something you'd all like to see more of. Okay, but enough explanation, let's get to the games. The first title is one that may already feel like I'm cheating, but it was also one of the main games that directly inspired me to make this video in the first place. But first, I need to make one thing very clear. I know basically nothing about Touhou. I'm not even sure if I'm saying it correctly, but my basic interpretation is that it's a shoot-'em-up series made by this guy called Zun, and then he was like, yeah, I'm not gonna sue you or anything, so make all the fan projects you want. And that's why there are also like fighting games and a search action game from the team that made Synchronicity Prologue, and I don't know, maybe there's like a golf game or something. I honestly haven't checked. But 2023 gave us the official release of Touhou Artificial Dream in Arcadia by Bar Holographic Otaku, which is one of the most directly SMT-inspired games I've ever played, particularly for fans of the first 2 titles in the series. The creator of the game, Potemki11, said on Twitter while working on the title that the game was absolutely supposed to be SMT. I want to make something like TPDP was to Pokemon, but for SMT, specifically old ones. And god did they succeed at that. Like, the reason I want to emphasize my complete lack of knowledge about Touhou is because being a complete outsider to the series did absolutely nothing to detract from my enjoyment of this title. I'm sure die-hard Touhou fans can enjoy it on a level I couldn't, like getting super excited and meme pointing at the screen when Bucket Girl here showed up, but even with minimal knowledge, I adore this title. You play as Sumireko and enter the world of Gensokyo through your dreams. The dream world is infested with these beings called sleepers, which from what I can tell are mostly, if not entirely, mute monstrous versions of iconic girls from Touhou Project. Thanks to your cell phone, Sumireko can capture and command these sleepers akin to demons from Megami Tensei, and you can summon up to 3 of them to aid you in battle. Instead of negotiating with them, since sleepers apparently can't talk, you can win them over by besting them in these little bullet hell minigames, which is a nice touch to the original series. From here, you can fuse sleepers together to get new ones, and try to fill out the database, which works similar to the many compendiums of Megami Tensei. The game has a third-person overworld that you can explore, but the dungeons utilize a first-person perspective. Most of the dungeons have unique mechanics, and it works well enough. Artificial Dream in Arcadia even has its own take on the classic Magnetite system, as keeping your sleeper summoned rapidly drains your battery like you're using a Google Pixel 7. Though you can eventually buy some upgrades from terminals, so it feels like you're making steady progress. While the game doesn't use the press turn system of many newer SMT games, it does utilize its own reward system for exploiting enemy weaknesses with the SP gauge, which you can fill up to perform special attacks or abilities. The graphics and music absolutely capture the vibes that they were going for perfectly, and it all comes together to create something worth experiencing. Honestly, if this game had been an actual SMT game made by Atlus, but all the Touhou girls were replaced with classic MegaTen demons, it'd probably be among my favorites in the franchise. The creator really understood what made those old games work while incorporating modern ideas that don't make the game feel sluggish. If you like the SMT-style dungeon crawlers, and especially if you're a Touhou fan, you're gonna want to give this game a shot. And no, I still have no idea who my favorite Touhou girl is. Probably Yugi. Maybe Mei Ling. Woodsalt is a game that took inspiration from Persona, but unfortunately one of the developers tried to highlight that fact in arguably not the best way. During an interview with PC Gamer, the developer told them, "Basically, I played Persona 4 Golden on my PS Vita, rest in peace lil buddy, and wanted to make a game similar minus all the grindy nonsense. So if you like Persona, then you'll like this." That quote led to PC Gamer posting the article on Twitter with the tweet, "Woodsalt is inspired by Persona, but without the grindy nonsense." And that tweet ended up causing such a, in PC Gamer's words, significant negative backlash that they updated the article to address it and included an apology from the developer. I'll admit that probably wasn't the best way to try and sell people on your Persona-inspired game, but on the other hand, if it wasn't for that significant negative backlash, I probably never would have even heard about the game, so I guess it worked out? But okay, that's what makes it eligible for this video, but what is Woodsalt from Team Woodsalt? Well, you play as MC, and if you think I'm gonna let it slide that the main character is named MC, you've got another thing coming, buckaroos and buckarettes. Anyway, MC awakens from cryosleep after about 1,000 years and has to adjust to life on New Terra after a vague cataclysm seemingly wiped out most of Earth, though some of the dialogue implies this may have been an SMT-style demonic apocalypse. Unlike a lot of other sci-fi stories about characters getting thawed out in space, New Terra is not some desolate wasteland that you have to help rebuild. Honestly, it's already a pretty thriving community with its own government, agriculture, and even barbecue restaurants. It's a place where people have built lives, started families, and for many people, New Terra is the only home they've ever known. MC's adjustment is made a bit easier because he was thought out by his younger sister, who is now actually older than him, and gives him a place to stay and helps introduce him to people who can show him around. The main plot of Woodsalt basically asks if you think it'd be better for humanity to return to Earth and try to rebuild what was once lost, or stay here on New Terra to continue to build upon where humanity is now. Two of the main characters, Plyler and Zoe, act sort of like alignment representatives for these ideologies, but you'll have the opportunity to get to know other characters that have their own views about these ideas. As the plot progresses, you'll learn a lot more about what's going on, and the game even tries to create these deeper supernatural elements by forcing MC to have these creepy visions, and this one guy named Neil who just seems to be the guy who knows he's in a video game. In fact, that's kinda where the Persona inspiration comes into play. Throughout the days, you have free time, and you can use that time to get closer to the characters of your choosing in a system intentionally reminiscent of social links. Unfortunately, there's no way to check how far you are into a character's story, and the main plot branches so much based on your choices that it's hard to tell what dialogue options actually affected things. I've never wanted more for a game to have some sort of flowchart to keep track of what story path I'm on, or how far I've progressed with specific characters. And on top of that, the game constantly auto-saves with no manual save options, so you can't even just go back a day and try different dialogue choices. I remember on my first playthrough, I managed to get my favorite character killed, so it's worth a second playthrough to try and see what you might be able to do differently. Many people commented on the fact that a Persona-inspired game without the RPG mechanics is basically just a glorified visual novel, which isn't entirely untrue. In fact, this is the only game I'm going to be talking about today that doesn't have any form of RPG battle mechanics, which I think is worth discussing in and of itself. I've always believed that the Megami Tensei franchise could work with any genre, and I do like seeing Atlus explore different avenues for their games, whether it's the Persona fighting games or giving the Jack Bros a search-action tie-in game for Strange Journey Redux. Likewise, it's nice to see indie developers realize that you can take inspiration from Megami Tensei to create a title in a genre that Atlus doesn't really focus on. Overall, Woodsalt is a perfectly alright game, but I'll admit I probably wouldn't have given it much of a second glance if not for that original Persona comparison that put the game in such hot water to begin with. However, with its engaging world, surprisingly solid supporting cast, and mildly unsettling supernatural elements, Woodsalt does manage to tell a pretty interesting story, without any of that grindy nonsense. Back in 2020, I started following a game developer on Twitter because of a single tweet that said, among other things, "I am developing hashtag hack and slash plus hashtag dating sim game inspired by hashtag Persona 3 hashtag Persona 5. Dating sim? Inspired by Persona 3 and 5 and not 4 apparently? Sign me right up. I even showed my early support with a very sincere, looking solid, and like, a little sign of the horns drawn out with text, because I'm cool like that." Despite following the developer on Twitter, little did I realize that a couple years later, I'd be blown away by a trailer in the Sony State of Play from not E3 2022 for a game called Eternights. And guess what, everyone? That game that I thought was looking solid in 2020 and that State of Play game from 2022 were the same game. I mean, that shouldn't surprise you, because otherwise this would have been a really random and needless tangent on my part. But yes, Eternights comes from Studio Sai, and was first teased back in 2020 before eventually getting a pretty big release in 2023. Not only did the game wind up appearing in the State of Play, but it ended up getting a physical release, and this Persona-inspired game ended up getting a pretty noteworthy cast, including multiple actors from the Persona series, like Xanthi Huynh, who plays Haru, and Alex Lee and Alejandro Saab, who are the new voices of Makoto Yuki and Akihiko Sanada, respectively. So, Eternights is the story about a total loser and his comic relief sidekick trying to get lucky on dating apps. Through some sheer luck, you get a match, but before you can meet up for your yacht date, side effects of a drug called Eternite seem to break out across the globe, transforming countless citizens into body horror monstrosities. Fortunately, your would-be date was a cosmic entity who grants you superpowers via a, magical transforming goopy arm. Eventually, you and your buddy team up with a pop star and a hologram lady and set up a base on a train, trying to bypass walls set up by the main villain to stop us from reaching our goal. Once you get past the intro and actually get onto the train, it's pretty easy to see where a lot of the Persona inspirations come into play. The game has a calendar system where you can perform one task during the day and one at night, and you only have so many days to accomplish your current objective, so there's a sense of time management. And a lot of the tasks are similar enough to Persona, like raising some of your stats, spending time with party members, or choosing to explore the current dungeon. The battle system is all action-based, but you won't be able to just button mash your way to victory, as you'll need to perfect timed dodges to slow down time, avoid damage, and fill up your special meter to use elemental attacks. You can perform these special attacks by succeeding in a QuickTime event, mashing the button a lot, and then succeeding in another QuickTime event. I will confess I screwed this up more than once by not realizing the mashing part had ended. But the main bread and butter of Eternights is that unlike Persona, there's a lot more emphasis on building romantic relationships with these characters. You can date the girl or guy of your dreams, but if you want to be right, you'll date Best Girl Min. She's my favorite. Truthfully, the game looks great, and all the characters are pretty well designed. Well, I'd say except the protagonist. I know games like this often want to have an everyman blank slate type character, but I think he's a little too boring looking. Like a logo or something on that Hanes white t-shirt would have been nice. Give him like Krillin's taco shirt or something. The main thing I could see people disliking about Eternights is its focus on comedy. Trying to have a sense of levity in a serious situation can be difficult writing-wise, and Eternights definitely stumbles with this every now and then. While I did laugh quite a few times, I often found myself groaning just as often. I know comedy is a very subjective thing, so I'm not trying to say the game isn't funny, but the jokes it goes for aren't always my cup of tea. For example, one of the first things that happens after your character awakens to his powers and his friend thinks he might be dying is to start talking about the time they stole porn from his grandpa. The game has quite a few instances of this type of tonal dissonance, but like I said, comedy is subjective, so maybe it'll be the funniest thing you ever did see. While the writing isn't always my favorite, I do think Eternights is absolutely stellar in a lot of other ways, and it's honestly impressive to see how big this little project grew over the years. I know Studio Sai has started expanding and is already working on future titles, so I'm excited to see what they deliver in the future, and hey, if they stick with the Persona inspirations, maybe I'll revisit them down the road. Heck, there was a cut character from Eternights named Yuria, so if they wanted, they could do the most Persona thing imaginable and release Eternights Overflow to introduce her as their version of the Atlas Girl archetype. Next up is Advent Crossroad from Nankata Games that came out back in 2021, and much like Artificial Dream and Arcadia, this is a great title for those looking to scratch that Megami Tensei dungeon crawler itch. Nankata has made several tweets promoting the game that just straight up use the SMT hashtag, and the official YouTube trailer says that it's an SMT-inspired DRPG. In Advent Crossroad, you play as a mall security guard, whom I named K-Bean because I have no imagination, and things start out pretty normal. You go stop a dispute at a clothing store where a guy was interested in cross-dressing, you investigate a suspicious package left in the women's bathroom, you team up with a government agent and use these mysterious devices called tabernacles to fight off the hordes of powerful monsters that started attacking and eating people. Oh, and you stop by the bakery to get one of those pizza pretzels, because if you've ever had them, they're really good. I'll admit right off the bat that Advent Crossroad appeals to me because I am a huge fan of malls as settings for stuff like this, especially when it comes to video games. From Sector Carina in Strange Journey to the Galaxy Galleria Mall in Space Quest 4, and even the mall from Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, I like malls, and this is a pretty fun one. Even though the mall in Advent Crossroad is completely sealed off, and the liminal spaces between the main wings have all warped into these winding dungeons that even feature more powerful super monsters like those found in Etrian Odyssey. One of the main mechanics in Advent Crossroad is the scan system, where if certain monsters use specific abilities while your scan is active, your characters can learn the abilities for themselves. It's a pretty nice mechanic that lends itself to the MegaTen inspiration. You don't get to recruit the monsters themselves, but every character being able to learn and use their abilities feels pretty good. You can also earn TP through battles and download new skills through your tabernacle and swap learned skills in and out to best suit a situation like in Digital Devil Saga. It's a good system that's fair and rewarding and can make for some interesting fights. And honestly, the combat in general has a lot more going for it than you might initially expect. Like in Persona 3, you've got 3 types of physical damage, but something that's cool is that you can often use context clues to your advantage, like flying enemies generally being weak against bows and guns. There are a lot of elemental attacks, and they can almost all cause different ailments, and that's not including the wide range of other ailment skills on top of that. The mechanics may look a bit basic at first, but it feels really good when you can get into the groove of it. As you make your way through the dungeons, you unlock different areas of the mall, and fortunately this mall has plenty of weapon and armor shops, and even with monsters ripping people apart and eating faces, all the employees still gotta earn that bread. You stumble upon more characters with access to tabernacles and try to learn the deep hidden secret behind this mall and where these monsters are coming from. You find out that not everybody who has one of these devices is using them for good either. While the dialogue isn't always the most compelling, and I caught a few minor grammatical errors here and there, the story did do a nice job of keeping me invested. The artwork for the characters is solid and the designs are okay, but I'll admit that none of the main cast really stands out to me that much. For example, this girl here is one of the main party members, but when I first saw her, nothing about her made her really stand out to me from most of the generic NPCs. I do really like how the protagonist always looks like he's half asleep, but it's also sort of a shame that his employers neglected to give him his security guard hat. He could have had some fun Raido Kuzunoha vibes, and having a distinct badge on his hat would have been a cool physical reminder of his connection to the mall that we're trying so hard to escape. That said, I do like a lot of the monster designs, and it's pretty exciting not knowing what you're gonna run into next. You start out fighting goblins and wolf-like creatures, but before too long you're taking down monstrous killer pie slices. If you're a fan of first-person dungeon crawlers, this is one you may want to check out, and if you wind up really liking it, the developer also released another game in the Cross series called Core Crossing. I don't have as much to say about that one for this video because I haven't played as much of it, and also that one seems to lean much more heavily on the Etrian Odyssey side of its inspiration rather than Megami Tensei. Nunkata was working on a third game that's supposed to be closer to Devil Summoner, and that may still be happening, but supposedly they're working with a publisher now, so I'll have to keep an eye out for future titles and see where things wind up with this series. And to wrap up this video, let's talk about the big one. The one that if I didn't talk about it, practically every comment would be telling me that I forgot to talk about it. But first, a quick note about this game. That's right, it's Undertale, the breakout indie hit of 2015. I knew I'd have to talk about this game, but truthfully, I'm not even really sure what I should say about it in this video. Does anybody watching right now really not already know about Undertale? Even though the game is nearly a decade old, I still think this is one of those games where anybody interested in it should just check it out for themselves. You play as a small child who winds up in the underground beneath a mountain in a land where monsters rule. From there, you explore and encounter a variety of characters and choose whether to befriend them, brutally murder them, or a mix of both. It's really up to you. One of the most famous aspects of Undertale is that the game typically remembers your choices, so the option of just reloading a past save and trying to undo the outcome may find you met with completely different dialogue. Instead of purely menu-driven based combat like a lot of RPGs, Undertale has you control your character through this little heart-shaped cursor, and you have to physically move it around to dodge what enemies throw at you, sometimes in a very literal sense. Though sometimes you do want to grab what they throw at you, because it's a whole thing, but I promise it makes sense. While you can just fight your way through the game, you may also choose to try out different tactics, like laughing at an insecure comedian's jokes, or just helping a little fellow achieve some alone time. The enemies in Undertale all feel like they have distinct personalities and lives beyond just existing to kill people, which makes perfect sense when you hear how Toby Fox was inspired by SMT when creating the title. In a 2013 interview with The Escapist, back when Undertale was still in development, Toby Fox said, "The inspiration for the talking system came from Shin Megami Tensei. I feel that it's important to make every monster feel like an individual. If you think about it, basically all monsters in RPGs like Final Fantasy are the same, save for the graphics. They attack you, you heal, you attack them, they die. There's no meaning to that." In a later interview with Nintendo, Fox reiterated this inspiration by saying, "The Act and Mercy commands were inspired by Shin Megami Tensei. I played just a bit of that game and loved talking to the monsters in it. Since I liked it so much, I decided I wanted to make a game where that was actually the main focus." While Undertale is widely considered a modern classic, I will admit I personally have mixed feelings about it. I'm not a huge fan of how the game looks, and there are certain beloved characters that I find pretty annoying. However, I do think it's more than worthy of a lot of the love and attention that it's received over the years, with it appearing in Smash Bros. And even going on to inspire a lot of other indie games. Which, if an indie game is inspired by Undertale, does that mean that game is also indirectly inspired by Megami Tensei? Funny enough, Toby Fox has said that another inspiration for Undertale's combat was bullet hell shooters like Touhou Project. So we started this list with a Touhou Project fan game inspired by Shin Megami Tensei, and ended it with a game inspired by both Shin Megami Tensei and Touhou Project. Really makes you think, doesn't it? No, it doesn't. And yes, I know Deltarune is also a thing, but like I said, I'm trying to only look at finished titles with this video. Alright, and that's 5 games with openly Megami Tensei inspirations. Truthfully, I had a lot of fun putting this list together. Some of these games were ones I'd played before, and some were pretty new to me. Honestly, I've already got a few games in mind if I revisit this idea, and I know a few big ones are actually coming out this year. So please, let me know if you'd like to see more videos like this one. Please consider subscribing so you don't miss out on any future content. Let me know what your thoughts on these games were in the comments below. Have you played any of them? Did any of them stand out to you? If you know of any games that I didn't talk about here that could have made this list, please let me know. Or if you're a developer working on a game with Megami Tensei inspirations, definitely let me know about that too. I'd love to check it out. Thanks for watching everybody, and until next time, take care.